if your parents were not predictable, consistent, and emotionally available, well, that sucks. But you can still learn how to do it. That's what's great. You can't pick your parents, okay? But you can take new information and go, you know what? That's good to know. How can I start to work on this? How can I start to improve my life? It's a maladaptation, which means you can get it adapted appropriately. Stay off your phones and actually be with your friends and connect, and then learn how to get into a good mindset and feel positive about yourself, positive about the future. Don't think it. It's just going to happen if you're enjoying yourself. We don't really have one brain. We have two that are working together. They're like a team. Team brain. Let's go. Well, you know what time it is. Episode 25. We're going to be diving into... Is that camera right? We're going to be diving into the book again. The big book. The development of the unconscious mind. We're also going to crack open one of these liquid deaths so I can murder my thirst. I'm sponsoring Liquid Death right now. I buy a can. I think these are like $2 or something like that, maybe $3. And I put them on podcast. So I'm sponsoring Liquid Death. Maybe they'll turn around and return the favor one day. We shall see. Hit those crickets because nobody wants to hear me drinking. I don't know. Maybe you do. Episode 25, dip it into the book. We're going to cover chapter 5. So I'm skirting over, let's see. We covered 1, so I'm skirting over 2, 3, and 4. I'll talk about, you know what? I forgot the book. I'm going to need that. Let's pause this for half a second. Actually, I'm just going to let it run. Nathan, you edit that out. We back, and we got the book, so that's good. Some music. So here we go. We got the book. We're ready to rock. Forgot the book, and but it's back. I'm gonna need my glasses for sure, which is lame, but part of the program at this point in my life. Goal of this episode: bring back to mind this knowledge and add to what we've already learned. Right. So a lot of the book was, he was saying the same thing over and over again and just adding some dimension to it or taking it from a different perspective, as one of the chapters about autism. And so, this is like 4 or 5 episodes ago now. 22, I think it was. I don't remember. It's like 3 or 4 episodes ago. And so I'm going to say the same thing, some of it, but man, listen, you don't learn something the first time you hear it usually. So a little bit of redundancy is always needed. And then we're going to add in, there's some cool stuff, some interesting things in chapter 5 I wanted to talk about. Simplify the information and make it accessible to anyone. And we'll have some fun. Hopefully. Get myself organized here. Where's this book? Outline of topics. We've got updates. Before we get started, I got to turn that screen around. Then we go to the book and final thoughts. So that's it. We got some updates. We're going to cover some stuff before we get started. Then we're going to go to the book. We're going to read that book, read these chunks of paragraphs and information and get excited because this book always gets me excited. And then we'll cover some final thoughts really quick and wrap this up. All right, updates. Well, apparently Michigan basketball is doing pretty good. And luckily a friend at the gym mentioned it. And I got to see these 2 games over this past weekend. This is going to be delayed to you, but whatever. That was fun to see Michigan Wolverines be the Big Ten champs. We'll see how they do in March Madness here. I don't know how much attention I'm going to pay, but we'll see. Golf, watch some golf. It's just, I got to sit down and stare at the TV. I don't know about you. I cut TV out for like a month, like a year or 2 ago. And I got to be honest, like, TV's really relaxing for me. Like, it's just like how I completely shut off. And one of the ways, I guess another way would be like take a vacation and hang out on the beach. That'd be great. But you just can't do that every Sunday. So I like watching a little TV. So I watched some golf and then I read. Sunday was like read day. Oh man, I'm reading this fantastic book. Again, it's about psychology. It's the discovery of the unconscious. So basically it goes over the whole history of, I might have mentioned this already, of psychotherapy and how I got started. And this thing starts all the way back at like 1775. Goes over some wild stuff, gets the history of some of the big names like Freud and Jung and these other guys, a couple that I didn't know about. And so reading that now. So anyways, I say all that because I was watching TV on Sunday and I read for 4 hours. I read an hour in the morning. I read 2 hours at the coffee shop, and then read another hour in the evening. Because I'm not getting it in as much during the week as I used to, So I still got to hit that 7 hours though. Anyways, another book. I won't cover that one. That's not worth covering. It's just too much to cover for this podcast. All right, golf. Anyways, weather. That golf and Sunday thing got me. Weather, here's how it went. It went sun, warm, rain, cooler again, and then sun again. And that's what happened. All in a week. Subscriber update. Nope. Need to clap. Subscriber updates. Email, same, 62. YouTube, 104 to 109. A YouTuber. Spotify, 24 to 25. And Apple stays 22. Reminder, please submit your questions to Dennis at DennisFenrich.com. All right, let's get into this. Before we get started, let's get into this. Before we get started, Nathan, can we get the book cover up over there? That'd be fantastic. The reason I'm not covering the whole book is because some of these chapters are just too specific. And I do this podcast to speak to a very broad audience. And so I'm avoiding the specific stuff in any regard, really. We're talking about nutrition. We're talking about exercise. We're talking about, the mind-body connection. We're talking about everything, things that everybody can relate to or learn something about. And so, like I said, one of the chapters is autism. That's obviously much more specific to a parent with an autistic child. Now, you might have an interest in it. If you're that interested, hey, Amazon.com, buy the book, okay? I'm going to read, was I going to do that now? Yeah, I'm going to read these chapter titles so you guys know what else is in here, because I'm only covering 3 or 4 of the chapters. So let us do that now. Let's see what we got here. All right, so chapter 1 is early emotional attachment, the development of the right brain, and the relational origins of the unconscious mind. Now, we covered that in episode, I believe, 22. Chapter 2 is modern attachment theory. And, just to summarize that, and I think I summarized that in the last podcast, modern attachment, so that used to be, modern attachment theory. So this attachment theory started to develop, I believe it was the 70s. And, it was the observation that children would be around their parent and then they would go out and explore. And when things went sideways, they would come back to the parent. And that was like the security blanket, much more than a blanket, obviously. And that was called attachment theory. Well, this guy, Allan Schore, is basically updating the thinking on that, right? Because if we still thought the same thing we thought in the 70s, well, then our thinking really isn't evolving. Like, we're not really learning anything new. So he's adding to that and thinks it should be updated to what's called regulation theory, because ultimately what that attachment is doing is teaching us how to regulate our emotions. And as we talked about before, typically the female is going to help regulate fear more, and that happens from age 0 to 2. And then in that little in-between period, the male typically, not always, starts to help regulate the aggression as the child starts to move out into the world and starts to punch and to kick and to wrestle and do these other things. That's typically regulated by the father, okay? That stuff's covered in there. All right. Chapter 3 is early interpersonal neurobiological assessment of attachment and autistic spectrum disorders. Again, there's the chapter on autism. A little too specific for our podcast. Chapter 4, all our sons, the developmental neurobiology and neuroendocrinology of boys at risk. Not going to cover that again, so we're going to cut out half our audience with that. Not that women wouldn't be interested in how men are going to develop differently. I think it is interesting, but I don't want to do 9 podcasts on one book. I guess that's really why. But it is an interesting chapter, and it talks about how males, boys, infant males have a longer developmental process, and that it actually keeps us more exposed to some of the, it goes into like environmental toxins and these other things that can go on that we stay a little bit more exposed to because we're in a longer developmental phase, period. Interesting chapter, but I'm not going to cover that. We are going to cover chapter 5 today and 6 for sure on the next podcast. And maybe I'll highlight some of the other stuff from the other chapters. I didn't have time to go into each chapter individually. I just went through 5 and highlighted what I wanted to cover today. And then also there's one more chapter, chapter 7, which I think is interesting because it's a interview that he does. And so it's the interviewer asks the question and then he answers it. And there's a lot of cool information there. He talks about his history. He talks about this 10-year period that I thought was fascinating, where he just like dove deep into learning about this. And just, it's a really fascinating approach that he had to taking in a whole bunch of information and helping him and then organizing it over those 10 years. If you want to listen to him, I mean, you could totally do that. I mentioned this the first time I covered this book. He's Huberman Labs podcast, Huberman Lab podcast, I think is what it's called, had him on. He's been on multiple podcasts, and he does talk about that and on the Huberman Lab podcast. So, but I think I may cover 7. I don't know yet. Okay. Depends on what other things are cropping up right now. All right. That's before we get started. All right. So I think I've covered the plan here. Chapter 5 is we're going to do a reintroduction and make some of the high points. I will cover chapter 6, probably 2-3 episodes from now, and we may cover 7. I'll go through it again. I read the book like, I don't even know, a month ago now, 2 months ago now, because I read the book on how to apply the psychotherapy, which is really good too. I want to cover some chapters out of that. This whole thing, this book just blew my mind. All right. It's a fascinating book. And if you'd like to understand how things work well, and how things, if they aren't ideal, that's still okay, and there's ways to improve. I mean, the organism, you're always adapting, right? So if you can put yourself in a situation that causes positive adaptations, bam, that's what you can do. So that was kind of covered in the book. But all right. Let's go to the book. What do we got? What did we highlight first? There's I remember it's 3 kind of major points to make out of chapter 5. Here's chapter 5. Hopefully, man, this mic seems like it's sitting high today. Hopefully, you guys have had a great week. Chapter 5 is 155. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention this. The book I'm reading right now, it's 900 pages. I'm not exaggerating. Maybe it was 800. Oh, I did mark it. Crazy long. That's why I'm not doing it on the podcast. It would be a whole year. All right, we're going to get right into chapter 5, early right brain regulation and the relational origins of emotional well-being. Wow, that's a chapter title right there. Think about that. Early right brain regulation and the relational origins of emotional well-being. Here we go. First thing, this is the first paragraph in this chapter. In an editorial in the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry titled Developmental Neuroscience Comes of Age, Leckman in March 2011 described the phenomenal progress of the past 3 decades. Looking both into the past and into the future, they boldly asserted, my nose itches again. They did not say that. That was me. All right, we're putting this thing. They boldly asserted it has become abundantly clear that the in utero and immediate postnatal environments and the dyadic relations between child and caregivers within the first years of life can have direct and enduring effects on the child's brain development and behavior. The enduring impact of early maternal care and the role of epigenetic modifications of the genome during critical periods in early brain development, health, and disease is likely to be one of the most important discoveries in all of science that have major implications for our field. Pow, that is a mouthful. What did he just say? It's a bold statement to say this might be the most important discovery in our field, because what is happening inside when the baby is inside the mother and outside of that and after that, and you'll find out in chapter 7 throughout our entire lives, is we are learning it and getting good at, hopefully, emotional regulation. And that starts in utero, which is fascinating because how does this affect future generations, right? We get this right, which is going to start to happen because you just didn't know. We didn't know, right? And the other thing I like to say is, listen, man, you can't pick your parents, okay? But you can take new information and go, you know what? That's good to know. How can I start to work on this? How can I start to improve my life? How can I start to improve how I function by getting this new information? Not just getting upset about it if it is upsetting, because I'm sure some people are going to hear that and go, man, my parents sucked. You know, I mean, yeah, people could definitely be thinking that. But focusing on that doesn't do you any good. What does you good is saying, all right, you know what? That was my situation. Tons of people have overcome this before. I'm going to overcome it. But now I've got new information. I can understand how to overcome it more effectively. And I think that's what's valuable. So bold statement right in the beginning of this chapter. Fantastic stuff. Same page. Indeed, over this time period, a large body, and this is back to Allan Schore, so he's writing again. Indeed, over this time period, of a large body of interdisciplinary research demonstrates that early brain development is not just genetically coded. Rather, it needs epigenetic social experiences. So you're not just born, you're born with a bit of a personality, if you haven't noticed. If you got kids, you definitely notice that. But the environment that they're in is going to affect how well they regulate their emotion. And this is what the conclusion is to the whole thing, basically, is that, you know, being quote unquote mentally healthy is being able to regulate your emotion, right? Like not being afraid. You know, if you deal with a lot of anxiety, well, that's stemming from fear, right? So how do you then get better at regulating your own emotion and not being fearful? Well, meditation, you know, a right brain psychotherapist would be great. Like just working on that emotional regulation side of things and getting good at not being overwhelmed, right? That's what fear is coming from. All right, back to the book. My work in interpersonal neurobiology attempts to elucidate precisely how optimal emotional attachment experiences shape and sculpt the early developing emotional right brain, and thereby the origins of an enduring background sense of subjective emotional well-being. Love this point here. He's talking about how this isn't something that you think about. This isn't a cognitive, I need to emotionally regulate myself. This is something that operates in the background that we can improve upon by getting connected with others who are able to better regulate their emotions, right? And so when you do that, there's something that's going on subconsciously that's rewiring how you have how your own background emotional regulation is working, right? So I think it's one of the main points. It's not a cognitive thing. This isn't cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which focuses on left brain thinking, which is value. It has value. I'm not saying it can't help, but this is more of a getting connected with others, getting yourself, you know what? It's a good way to think about this. You got a good group of friends and you hang out and you don't spend your time on your phones together. You spend time communicating together and you get into a fun, enjoyable, emotionally regulated environment. And then what is going on is subconsciously in the background, your brain is mirroring and recreating that inside of your own physical structure. Okay. But if you're hanging out with your friends and you're on your phone, which is cognitive, I suppose it is affecting you emotionally, you're not getting that emotional regulation. Now, this is a terrible analogy, but I think it makes sense. Okay. Like, it's pretty common knowledge that if you've got an unsocialized dog, how you socialize the dog is you put them in a group of socialized dogs and the dog will figure out how to behave. Now, we're not dogs, okay? I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that when you're hanging out with your friends, stay off your phones. Stay off your phones and actually be with your friends and connect and then learn how to get into a good mindset and feel positive about yourself, positive about the future. Don't think it. It's just going to happen if you're enjoying yourself. And that's going to teach you that's going to teach you, again, this is so hard to articulate. You're going to subconsciously learn how to do that. Your brain is going to rewire itself into those healthier, emotionally regulated states. Yes, that's what I want to say about that. All right, back to the book. The beginnings of living systems set the stage for every aspect of an organism's internal and external functioning throughout the lifespan and a subjective sense of emotional well-being. Again, the main points here were, one, this is groundbreaking. Two, we create this background. How does he say it? How does he say it? Enduring background sense of subjective emotional well-being. So it's running in the background. It's not cognitive, right? All right, back to the book. Since that time, my ongoing studies continue to offer interpersonal neurobiological models of the underlying mechanisms by which attachment promotes self-regulation and of how this emergent function in turn allows new and more complex and resilient relational interactions between the individual and the social environment. I don't know how somebody writes a sentence that long, to be honest. Get a period in there, brother. So one of the things, and maybe this is a later point, mixing this in, but when you are in a good emotionally regulated state, how do you feel? You feel happy, you feel curious, you feel optimistic, right? So when you're in those states, it's basically giving you the foundation to go out and explore in your world, right? To take on new challenges, go to school or get a new job or make that change because you feel confident in your ability to do it, or at least not so emotionally dysregulated that you feel restricted to do it. You feel like you can't do it, right? Positive frame of mind, right? Like being in a good emotional state is going to allow you to then add on and build on those emotional states by going out and building your life, which I think is pretty fascinating. All right, so this was an interesting point if anybody likes numbers. So this here talks about brain growth. The earliest studies exploring the earliest stages of rapid dynamic brain development has significantly expanded, demonstrating that the rate of synaptogenesis in the developing infant's brain is a remarkable 40,000 new synapses every second, and that brain volume increases from 400 grams at birth to 1,000 grams at 12 months. So synaptogenesis, your brain creating synapses. Synapses are the things that, if you don't know what a synapse is, you can picture that's like a synapse, okay? And so this is what your neurons are doing. They're not touching. There's a gap in there, and there's all kind of communication going on in between the gap. And when things jump over the gap, go back and forth between the gap. There's chemicals in between the gap. Your serotonin's in between the gap. There's all kinds of stuff in between the gap, and it's just communicating between those synapses. And so you're generating those. What do you say? 4,000 a second? I think, no. 40,000 synapses every second. And that at the end of 12 months, your brain goes from 400 grams to 1,000, which is 2.5 times its growth. So there's this rapid development. Like your brain is just adding in tissue at a super accelerated rate from 0 to 12 months. And when you're doing that, you're layering in this emotional regulation while this stuff is being laid down. It's like building a house. What up? All right, back to the book. We're about halfway there. Back to the book. Big read right here. It's a big paragraph. I got to read the whole thing. This is a new section in the book, in this chapter. Optimal attachment experiences and the early relational origins of emotional well-being. All right, so here we go. Modern attachment theory articulates the progression of early developing right brain structures and survival functions over the prenatal, perinatal, and postnatal critical periods and stages of infancy. In 2001, Walker Andrews and Ba-Rick asserted, from birth, an infant is plunged into a world of other human beings in which conversation, gestures, and faces are omnipresent during the infant's waking hours. Moreover, these harbingers of social information are dynamic, multimodal, and reciprocal. 2001, page 469. This description reflects a paradigm shift in our conception of infancy. Previous developmental psychological models had focused on the development of more complex cognition late in the first and into the second year. So basically, again, like I said a moment ago, what we think about, right? We used to focus on what we wanted to teach them things, right? We wanted them to start learning. We wanted them to learn how to read. We wanted them to go math. We wanted them to be these geniuses. But that is not what is critical in that time frame. What is critical in that time frame is emotional regulation. All right, this is the same paragraph right here. The significant recent increase in research in early human social development clearly demonstrates that from the very beginning, the developing human is emotionally related with the social environment, moving the emphasis from cognitive to emotional development. The baby is a sentient being capable of perception, sensation, and feeling, and thereby states of consciousness. Her emerging subjective developing mind is created in an intersubjective context in the social world. In the first year, before the onset of verbal language, she is communicating with her caregivers who are attempting to communicate with her. In order to process these nonverbal communications, the infant seeks proximity to mother, who must be subjectively perceived as predictable, consistent, and emotionally available. Okay. So, if your parents were not predictable, consistent, and emotionally available, well, that sucks. But you can still learn how to do it. That's what's great. That's what Chapter 7 talks about. The main point of that paragraph, and I think what is so fascinating, is how, I don't remember when it started, but, the whole left brain cognitive therapy thing, I'm going to sit down and we're going to talk about, and we're going to bring into our mind these stories or these things that are happening and think about them cognitively and try and rewrite that story or try and tell ourselves something different about it. Although helpful, doesn't actually solve or quote unquote fix or improve the problem. It just kind of keeps that emotional dysregulation emotionally dysregulated, but in a bottle, right? Like it keeps it kind of, it's not fixing it. I hope this is making sense. Let me get a drink here. So, if you'd like to improve that, have friends that are emotionally stable and available and consistent, right? If your friends, if you go hang out with your friends and you go connect with them and they're not emotionally regulating, well, they're not showing you how to do it. If that's something you like to do. That's why I said earlier, get with your friends, 3, 4, 5 friends, stay off your phones, get to know each other, get into deeper emotional states, stay regulated, process, right? So missing in our damn society right now. All right. Anyways, back to the book. Let me see what we got here. I didn't mark that, so I'm not reading it. Oh, there's a big thing. Okay. All right. We're getting there. About 2/3. All right, here we go. Back to the book. As the securely attached infant enters toddlerhood in the second year, his or her interactively regulated right brain, visual, facial, auditory, prosodic, and tactile gestural communications become holistically integrated. I couldn't tell you how many times he said those 3 things just like that in that order. So many times. Allowing for the emergence of a coherent right brain emotional and corporal implicit self system. As mentioned in the beginning of this chapter, an essential function of the right brain subjective self is to unconsciously generate a background sense of emotional well-being and implicit sense of security that operates beneath levels of conscious awareness. There it is again. Okay, we're going to make a big point on this big paragraph right here. Ongoing neuroscience research continues to describe the adaptive social emotional functions of the right brain. According to Decite, that's how you say this guy's name, and Chaminade, I don't know how to say their names. I'll say what they said though. Self-awareness, empathy, identification with others, and more generally intersubjective processes are largely dependent upon ... right hemisphere resources, which are the first to develop. At all later stages of human development, the neural substrates of the perception of voices, faces, gestures, smells, pheromones, which used to be a thing people would talk and laugh about, apparently they're real, as evidenced by modern neuroimaging techniques, are characterized by a general right hemisphere functional asymmetry. So basically, when they're taking pictures of the brain while the brain's doing what it's doing, and these things are all showing up inside the brain, right? Like the prozoatic, what else we got going on here? Voices, faces, gestures, smells, and pheromones, as evidenced by modern neuroimaging techniques, are characterized by a general right hemisphere functional asymmetry. Basically pointing out this is happening in the right side of the brain. In essence, one of the things said in one of these two books is that, I don't remember which one it was, you got two brains, which is just nuts, okay? That's why they're bifurcated, they're lateralized, you got your left, you got your right. Yeah, your right brain is running your left side of your body, your left brain is running your right side of your body. It's really fascinating to think that we don't really have one brain, we have two, that they're working together. They're like a team. Team brain, let's go. This rapid perception of emotional stimuli takes place within a social context. In an overview of brain laterality research, Heichit, I don't know how to say his name, asserted mounting evidence suggests that the right hemisphere has a relative advantage over the left hemisphere mediating social intelligence. Talk about social intelligence in a second. Identifying social stimuli, understanding the intentions of other people, awareness of the dynamics in social relationships, and successfully handling of social interactions. I don't like social intelligence. I think that seems like it's a cognitive thing. Again, this is subconscious background operating stuff that you're not really aware of. That's why when you can end up in a social situation you're not comfortable with, like, it doesn't always go well because you end up in this pattern of behavior that's like not entirely appropriate for the situation. Again, all these things are able to be improved, which is fantastic. Social relationships are also context for right brain to right brain interactive regulation. Get together with your friends. A large body of studies indicate that over the lifespan, the right and not the left lateralized prefrontal regions are responsible for the most complex regulation of affect and stress. It goes on to cite all the studies. Who do we got? I can't say any of these names. Who is this? Sosa is on there. He used to be a baseball player. All Media, Sir Cura, whatever. 2008, 2008 Schore, 94, 2003, 2003B, 2012, Sullivan and Grattan, 2002, Wang. So basically all these people in these different times doing studies showing that this emotional thing is happening on the right side of your brain dominantly. All right, I got a little note for myself. I'm going into deep stuff, man. I was getting after it. It's probably a little too much for this podcast, but whatever, man. I got social anxiety, not a condition, but a maladaptation, right? So people, I have social anxiety. It's not a sentence. It's not a thing that you have that's just the way you are, right? It's not, it's not like you were born without a hand or something, right? Like it's a maladaptation, which means you can get it adapted appropriately, right? Don't take all these labels people want to put on people right now all the time, man. You're so malleable. You can straighten all this stuff out. Hopefully this is coming across as positive. Bam, back to the book. Suggests that the often used concept of emotional well-being is more properly characterized as social emotional well-being. Huge point here. Previous psychological thinking, my psychology is me inside my own head. That's how it was looked at. It's wrong. It's not wrong. You're a social being, right? We are not supposed to be isolated. We are socially, emotionally regulated within a group. Again, get a group of friends, hang out, have a conversation, talk about stuff that matters. Learn how to emotionally regulate yourself within a group. You only do that by being in a group. Back to the book. Secure attachment is defined not only by a sense of safety, but also by a positively charged curiosity that fuels the burgeoning self's exploration of novel social, emotional, and physical environments. Yeah, I thought I was making this point on something previous. This is the one though. So again, like when you get into those social mindsets, when you're emotionally, socially regulated and everything's in good place and you're not afraid of the future, you can then go and take action. You can then think about changing your future, right? We have to get into these places if we're going to have a good impact and be able to create the life that we want. You have to have a good network of friends, man. family. Like I said, if you can't, like family's hard, man. I'll tell you that. Put a friend network together. Back to the book. If facts are the seeds, oh, this is beautiful. All right, here we go. If facts are the seeds that later produce knowledge and wisdom, then the emotions and the impressions of the senses are the fertile soil in which the seeds must grow. The years of early childhood are the time to prepare the soil. It is more important to pave the way for the child to want to know than to put him on a diet of facts he is not ready to assimilate. An emotionally regulated child is how we learn, right? If you're emotionally dysregulated, you got stuff going on in your head, you can't calm down, it's going to be really hard to learn. I don't think that's too complicated, right? But it's said so eloquently, man. All right. Couple more things and we're going to wrap this up. Man, this always takes longer than I thought. Back to the book. Mears, 2012, described a form of therapeutic conversation that can be conceived as a dynamic interplay between two right hemispheres. In these emotionally charged therapeutic encounters, the therapist's right brain visual, facial, auditory prosthetic, and tactile gestural capacities for the nonverbal communication and regulation of the patient's emotional states are critical to the change process of psychotherapy. There it is again, that thing. I couldn't tell you how many times I read that. Visual, facial, auditory prosthetic, and tactile gestural. Man, he said that 1,000 times in this book. But here he's talking about like what the therapist's role is, and that you're getting, if you're going to go seek therapy, you want to be able to connect to a right brain, which is an emotional connection. It's not a cognitive connection. And that's critical to the developing an improvement of your own social, emotional regulation. Back to the book. And working with patients who present with early right brain attachment trauma, therapeutic expertise is expressed not so much in uncovering verbal context by left brain interpretations that promote cognitive understanding as much as the clinician's relational, psychobiological capacities in implicit right brain emotional and social functions. My ongoing studies continue to suggest that change in traumatic therapy is not an analytic left brain talking cure, but a right brain relational affect communicating and regulating cure. For the latest update of this model, see Schore, blah, blah, blah. The right, blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Thus, effective affect regulation therapy with infant, child, adolescent, and adult patients can act as a growth facilitating environment that alters the right brain and thereby potentially promote a more secure sense of emotional well-being. Note, in line with current relational trends in psychotherapy, well-being is more than an interpersonal intrapsychic function, but also an interpersonal intersubjective phenomenon. Again, like we just said, it's not just something that's going on in my head. It's something that's going on between us with other human beings, okay? If you're looking for help in this area, seek out a right brain to right brain psychotherapist. And we are getting close to wrapping this up. A couple more and we're done. At the beginning of this chapter, I described the excitement in developmental neuroscience around current studies on the impact of early maternal care on brain development, one of the most important discoveries in all of science that have major implications for our field, as we talked about a second ago, or 30 minutes. The groundbreaking advances in our understanding of the science of early development have larger implications for cultural and political systems as well as for family law. In an editorial in the journal Science, a focus on child development, Silver and Singer, 2014, described the wider economic implications of early brain research for the development of not only the individual, but also the culture. I just thought this part was interesting. I'm going to read another section right here. Is it just talks about like, yes, we all, when we're listening to this and we're thinking about this, or if you got the book and you're reading the book, you're thinking about yourself. And maybe if you are a little bit more emotionally developed, you're thinking about other people, not trying to fix them, but how maybe they were affected by this stuff. But this section right here talks about the whole, like our society as a whole. And in another section of the book, he talks about like changing the way we take time off from our jobs when we have a child. And that I know in other countries like Europe, they get very long. I don't remember what it's called, but you get time off for having a child, where ours are pretty short. And like, if we're going to set our society up in a way that is rock solid, emotionally healthy, capable of taking things on, we're going to want to implement this stuff. Now, that's not the way it is right now. You pointing out and saying, yeah, well, America sucks. They don't, hey, we're not perfect. We got some things to figure out, but take responsibility, do what you can do. All right. That's the only way. Back to the book. Recent advances in neuroscience indicate the importance of healthy brain development in the early years to human capital formation. So this is going to take a very analytic numbers perspective, but hey, you know what? Economists are very helpful. Okay, so I'll start again. This could turn some people off, so I just want to say that. Recent advances in neuroscience indicate the importance of healthy brain development in the early years to human capital formation. Investing in child development is the foundation for improved health, economic, and social outcomes. Not getting the early years, air quote, right, is linked to violent behavior, depression, higher rates of non-communicable disease, and lower wages, and it negatively affects the nation's gross domestic product. So when you start hearing stuff like that, you're going to start to see change. Because if people want, our country to do well, if they want society to do well, they're going to take this information and they're going to try and help get it incorporated into what we're doing here. If they don't, they won't. All right. Advances. And that is it. We're going to wrap it up with that. That is right. All right. Fantastic. All right. Let's wrap this up, guys. Final thoughts. This, like I said before, episode 22, like this book rocked me. Like this was such clarity. It really changed my view of people. It changed my view of myself and how we grow and how we improve ourselves as human. Like regulating our own emotion, our fear, and our aggression is so critical to being productive and putting the lives together that we want. So I love this book. I'd encourage you to read it and do the work. It helped me understand what emotional health is. Fear regulation, okay? Like number one, because if you're going to go, hey, if you're nervous about starting something new, but you need to do something new, well, that's just a little bit of fear. You got to learn how to regulate that. Get yourself calm. Get yourself in a place where you can go and take the action that you need to take. Social. We need to be connected to other people. I've said that a bunch during this podcast. Build a network of friends that are more emotionally stable than you and learn how to do that. Like hang out, get off the phone, spend time with people, talk, connect. It's so critical to our emotional well-being and health. And if you're emotionally healthy, if you feel like you got this stuff, then maybe you go and connect and help others. Find some friends. They can't be too crazy though. If they're too crazy, it's going to be too much for you. I'll tell you that. This book is available everywhere books are sold. If you're intrigued by this information, I would obviously recommend reading the book. Next episode, I wrote a blog article called, "Is a Snickers Bad for You?" Excuse me. I'm going to read that blog article and give you some of my thoughts from, behind the scenes, what was going on in my head or whatever, right? So we're going to go through that blog article, read that to you guys. And I think that was really fun when I did it last time because I just got to have a good time with it. And I think that'll happen again. Because is a Snickers really bad for you? Is it? I'm not so sure. All right, guys, have a great week. As always, submit your questions to Dennis@DennisFenrich.com, and you can support us on the YouTubes or the Spotifys or the Apples, wherever you are listening. Share it with a friend. We'll talk with you guys soon. All right, bye.